Welcome back. All right, so I think now's a good time to talk about contracts. We are about a week away from the start of training camp for everybody, and so less than that actually. So really, any big contracts that are going to get signed that are in effect this year, we've already seen get signed. So looking at contracts that are in effect for this year. So I'm not looking at contracts that have been signed that kick in next year. I'm talking about ones that I think are good contracts. I often see 10 worst contracts in the NHL, 10 best contracts in the NHL. I think what makes a best or worst contract, I think it really depends on how you look at it. And really, in all honesty, it's a tough one. So I'm not going to say these are the best. In fact, I'm wearing a Pasternak jersey because Pasternak's not on the list today. But with the Bruins, we'll get into it when we get there. Finding one good contract per team. Let's go ahead and jump into this. We'll talk about it starting with Winnipeg, ending with Anaheim, and here we go. So for Winnipeg, my choice is Kyle Connor's contract, which pays him a total of $7.142 million until 2026. Connor could score 50 this year. That contract's fantastic. And it is interesting to see how well these contracts look like they're going to be aging. Some of the ones that were signed over the last couple of years. So, yeah, we'll see if these ones continue to age really, really well, right? For the Washington Capitals, I went with an older player than Connor. I went with John Carlson. Carlson, $8 million cap hit, also until 2026. So Connor's your 50 goal scorer. Carlson is going to be remembered as a player that at the end of his career probably doesn't end up winning a Norris. He'll be remembered as one of the better defensemen in the league who never won a Norris trophy. And Carlson, absolutely fantastic resume he's put together. I think at $8 million per season, I think that's a bargain. But again, with Washington, there were a couple I looked at. I went with Carlson. So Vegas Golden Knights, the team of the long last names. I went with one of those long last names, and that's Chandler Stevenson, whose cap hits $2.75 million for 2 more years. The Vegas Golden Knights, they spend a lot of money, and they end up over the cap regularly, right? All the shiny new objects and all this that I've talked about in videos before. Stevenson, really shrewd move to bring him in a trade, and really smart contract at $2.75 million for a guy who's going to likely still be one of your top 2 centers. I like that contract quite a bit. So while it may not be a team that has a lot of really good contracts, I think that one's fantastic. With Vancouver, there wasn't really many options here. There are 2 that I think are really good. Quinn Hughes' contract is excellent, and Thatcher Demko is signed for $5 million until 2026. No concerns in Vancouver's net for 4 more years. I am all for that. I think that having your goaltending spot just settled and not having to worry about it from a contract perspective, from a trade or draft perspective, I think that's fantastic. And so Demko at $5 million. At the time he signed that contract, of course, it looked like there was some risk. There still is, obviously, with almost any contract in the league, but the risk is really, really low with the Demko contract and him being signed for that long. Really solid contract. Hey, the previous regime of the Canucks did sign some good contracts. It's just there were some bad ones, and then there were some iffy trades, and that's what'll get remembered the most. For Toronto, this one's an interesting one in that at the time it was signed, this was a lot of money. Nylander, it was a lot of money up front. And so while the cap hit is $6.962 million per season until 2024, of the 4 core players in Toronto, that is the nicest of the contracts. And I'm talking comparatively speaking with Marner, Matthews, and Tavares. So this is why, as much as some Maple Leaf fans might say, but we wouldn't want to trade Nylander. Nylander, if there was a situation where Kyle Dubas says, that's it, I got to change this core, Nylander would be the easiest one to move of those 4 players. I mean, Morgan Riley, I guess, counts as core too, right? His contract's not bad either. But yeah, Nylander's at $6.962 million. Yeah, it's from a cap hit perspective, it's a good contract. Tampa Bay, there's only one player it could be, and this is an example of players leaving money on the table. That's Hedman. People will say, well, it's the cap, it's the tax free and all that. Well, here's the thing: if Hedman hit the market, he's making $7.875 million a season in cap till 2025. There's no way a team like Dallas, where there isn't a problem with taxes either, wouldn't throw him $10 million plus a season if they could afford it. So it's more than just the taxes part of it. The success of the team and wanting to keep things together will absolutely be a driving factor. Part of the reason I'm wearing the Bruins jersey that I am. But yeah, Hedman, excellent contract. $7.875 million for a guy who's going to be top 3 in voting for the Norris every year. That's an excellent contract. San Jose was tough. So San Jose went with a contract that honestly looked like at the time it was signed it was going to be a bad one. And that's Timo Myers, who in 2023 becomes an RFA again. Now, his salary this year is $10 million. When he signed that contract, that would have meant the qualifying offer for San Jose would have started at $10 million. Probably part of the reason he signed that contract. But with the new CBA, that changed. So now the qualifying offer next year for San Jose is $7.2 million. Considering Meyer has shown he's a 30 plus goal scorer, that's a good contract. That's solid. And even if $7.2 million is what you're paying him next year, that's a very good contract as well. So Meyer at $6 million, that's a smart contract on a San Jose team that it can be difficult to find smart contracts with. Seattle. I went with Yanni Gourde. Yanni Gourde signed to a contract that pays him $5.16 million until 2025. And again, Yanni Gourde, good player, signed in Tampa, ends up in Seattle because Tampa doesn't have cap space. So now Seattle gets that really good contract of Yanni Gourde's. And honestly, for 3 more years, it guarantees them at least a top 6 forward there at a good cap hit. So, and with a lot of experience, right? There's that veteran side of it too. So I like Gourde's contract. And it is another one that at the time it was signed looked okay. Now you look at it in comparison with the rest of the league, it looks pretty good. St. Louis. I thought about one of their blue liners. So picking one of their blue liners. But I'm going with Buchnevich, who at $5.8 million until 2025, that's a decent contract too. So again, this is the a good shorter term contract comparatively speaking to all of these guys signing 8-year deals. But at $5.8 million, that is very much a contract that St. Louis is going to be happy with, considering the way Buchnevich fit right in, and he produced a lot of points for St. Louis last year. So, yeah, that contract's on there. I wouldn't be surprised if I do this video next year if Buchnevich is still the one I'm looking at as a bargain for the St. Louis Blues. Although Blues fans are going to be hoping that that's the Robert Thomas deal that looks fantastic and that Thomas continues to take those strides too, right? Pittsburgh, well, and I thought about wearing this guy's jersey for this video because there are those who misunderstand. So I saw in a recent video where I was talking about contracts and I talked about Sidney Crosby. And $8.7 million is the cap hit until 2025. I talked about Crosby and McDavid. And there were those who felt that I was basically putting Crosby in as like he's just a regular player. No, I'm stating that arguably the best player in the league over the last 20 years, making $8.7 million. That's fantastic, and Crosby's contract is excellent. And it is an example of a player not necessarily looking to maximize how much money. So if he wanted to make more, he could have signed a shorter term deal. He could have said, yeah, I'll give you guys the $8.7 million, but I'll sign a 4-year deal, knowing he would cash in 4 years later. Crosby has always been a team player when it comes to his contract. So while we can look at that contract and say, well, it was expensive when it was signed, yes, but he would have known the cap was going to go up and he would have wanted a shorter term deal if he really wanted that maximum amount of money. So while he gets paid, I think he is definitely a bargain. I've actually lived long enough that $8.7 million is a bargain. All right, Philadelphia, I went with, and Philadelphia's got its share of eyebrow-raising contracts. I went with Farabee. Farabee is signed for $5 million a season until 2028. There's injury risk with Farabee. Obviously, with anyone on a long-term contract, you're going to worry about injuries. But Farabee's a young player, and I really like that cap hit. I think that if Philadelphia can help him get to the next level, I think that contract's going to age very, very well. Now, for Ottawa, while there are a lot of young players signed to good contracts, I love Chabot's cap hit of $8 million until 2028. Young defenseman, they've signed him through his prime, And I don't see any reason that contract should have any kind of risk outside of the injury risk. Shabbat's an excellent defenseman. I would recommend early in the season for anybody, because usually they'll have like a free preview of all the NHL stuff. Watch an Ottawa game. Watch Shabbat. And if you haven't watched Ottawa much over the last couple of years, I don't blame you, but Shabbat's game is fantastic. That $8 million cap hit is solid. There's some really good contracts on this Ottawa team going forward. For the New York Rangers, well, Chris Kreider almost set the record for goals this past season, so that means that right now that $6.5 million cap hit until 2027 looks excellent. Absolutely excellent contract for Kreider right now, and an excellent contract for the Rangers. And again, signed till 2027. One thing that's different about this video, comparatively speaking with what I would have done 6 years ago with the exact same numbers, my favorites would have been all the shorter term contracts. I would have said, no, it's too long of a term. That's something that's definitely changed over the last 6 years. I've talked, and maybe I'll do a video on things that have changed the most with the way that I view hockey over the last 6 years since the channel started up. All right, New York Islanders. Well, for the Islanders, I mean, Pulock won't score 50 goals. I mean, maybe if you combine enough seasons together, he might. But at $6.5 million until 2027, that contract looks great because Pulock can do a little bit of everything out there, play a ton of minutes, and that's a solid deal. And I think Dobson's is going to be very good too. I do think that Lou Lamoriello, while he has his bad contracts, the good contracts balance those bad ones out and really kind of save him as GM. And so for people who really like Lou Lamoriello and really like the job he's done, these are contracts that you can pull out, the Pulock one. And if you don't like Lou Lamoriello, there's some contracts there you can pull out and say, look, but this one's not very good. The Pulock one is absolutely excellent. New Jersey. So New Jersey's kind of a tough one because they've got some younger players signed to contracts that they haven't really grown into yet, like Hischier and Hughes. Those contracts will likely look like bargains later. But for Sharon Govich, he's only making $2 million. Now, next summer, he is an RFA, but the fact he's an RFA means New Jersey retains control. So look for Sharon Govich to sign an extension. I would think during this season they sign him to an extension. Don't wait until the end of the season when that price just keeps going up. Sign him during the season, get her done. New Jersey's got some good contracts. Again, the Hughes and Hischier contracts may end up on this board. What, 2 years from now? I'll say 2 years from now, either Hischier or Hughes would probably be the pick for New Jersey. But for right now, I'm going with Sharon Govich. Nashville. I really didn't have to look over Nashville's much because UC Saros is making $5 million. His cap hit's $5 million. The cap hit doesn't mean that's what they're making. $5 million until 2025 for UC Saros. Honestly, there really isn't any risk with this. Even if he gets injured every season, at $5 million, if he's playing 50, 55 games the way we know he can, it's still a very good contract. So yeah, UC Saros, I like him a lot, and I hope that this year, unlike last year, I can go through a full Nashville game without hearing about how short he is. About how he's not quite 6 feet tall. I would like to see that. We'll see if that happens. For Montreal, now if you watch the Nashville broadcast, they don't really talk about it, but if you watch the opposing team's broadcast, it's always brought up. Montreal, a team going through a rebuild. So I had to pull somebody that's a young player. And some guys haven't got long-term extensions yet. And also, for the record, if you're wondering, well, what about this guy on an entry-level contract? Entry-level contracts, to me, don't count as bargain or not, because it's an entry-level contract, and there's only a certain amount of money that player can make. So it can't be an entry-level contract, talking about best contracts. But Nick Suzuki, who came out of his entry-level contract, got paid $7.875 million until 2030. So this is where things have changed in terms of my opinion. The fact this contract is signed through 2030. I've talked in recent videos about what the salary cap's going to do. That contract's going to age pretty darn well. I like Suzuki a lot. People know this. And so looking forward to seeing how well that contract ages for him and for the Montreal Canadiens. I got my fingers crossed on that one. Minnesota. I went with another that's on a really long extension, but I think this one's going to age well too. And that's for Joel Eriksson Ek. At $5.25 million until 2029. He's a goal scorer, and he's a good goal scorer. and a good top six forward for the Minnesota Wild. A young player and signed for $5.25 million until 2029. When we look at some of the contracts being signed by veteran older players, I think it makes Eriksson Ek deal look even better. So Minnesota Wild did a good deed there. Obviously, there was some risk to that contract because he signed it after having that one really good year, but then he followed it up with a good year as well, and I think that contract's going to be good for them. For the LA Kings, this one was tough too because it feels like there's so many players still on entry-level contracts. So I went with Trevor Moore, who is signed to a deal that pays him $1.875 million for one more year. So Trevor Moore is the target for next summer. LA is going to make sure he doesn't go to the market, I would think. Moore, excellent player, developed very, very well for them. And, of course, they're working on getting a contract done with Jersey. Word has it this morning that Mikey Anderson's going to get signed for them. There is going to be people surprised at Mikey Anderson's value down the road. But for now, I'm going with Moore. The $1.875 million, it is a bargain deal, even though it expires this year. For Florida, I remember too when Ekblad signed this deal, and there were those that thought it was too much money, which is standard. You will always have people say, well, that's too much money. But it's $7.5 million until 2025. And again, Ekblad's got to stay healthy this year, but he was in the conversation for the Norris in the first half of the season. And while he was never prominent, I mean, we knew that Makar, Hedman, Fox, I mean, this is your top tier guys. The reality was Ekblad was not far behind, and he was playing very, very well. And at $7.5 million, much like Shabbat here at 8, Pulock at 6.15, getting that defenseman who can play 25 minutes plus a night, and you get him locked down, that can be a really, really smart move. So, yeah, Ekblad, 2025. And again, for the Canucks, I almost put up Hughes, but I went with Demko instead. Edmonton, another contract that at the time it was signed, people talked about it. I remember when Draisaitl signed that deal. And all the, well, that's not going to age well. He hasn't done anything yet. I don't know what they're thinking. What's Chiarelli doing? Well, Chiarelli knew something, because $8.5 million is a cap hit for Draisaitl till 2025 is fantastic. It means that window for the Edmonton Oilers stays open, and because he's not making that $10 million plus that he would if he was a free agent right now, it gives them a little bit of breathing room there to keep that team together and to make some additions here and there too if Ken Holland's able to make the right moves to get them further below the cap. But Draisaitl's contract is fantastic and continues to age extremely well. Detroit, I went with one of their signings from this summer. I went with Perron. Now, I know Perron, there's going to be the injury risk with him, and I know he's an older player, but at $4.75 million until 2024, there's no risk. Perron's a top 6 forward in the NHL. I've been talking in videos too, and you know, I mentioned how Elliot Friedman had said that the going rate now for a top 6 forward is $7 to $8 million a year. That means Perron at 4.75 is just absolute gold for Detroit. And there are other good contracts for Detroit too. That Husso deal may end up aging very well too. So we'll see if Detroit ends up being another Tampa Bay, where we're looking at a lot of contracts and saying, wow, how did Yzerman do this? It is a magic he can work. And I think part of it is he can sell guys on, hey, see what I did in Tampa, I'm going to do it in Detroit too. Come on in, join the party, get in on the ground floor. Dallas. For Dallas, I went with a contract that's expiring this year. There are others I thought about, but I'm going to go with Roope Hintz, who makes, it is $3.15 million. Just one more year, but he is an RFA next summer. So Roope Hintz is going to get paid. Then that might be part of what's holding up the Robertson deal, right? Where if you give Robertson, say, $9 million a year, well, now Hintz is $9 million a year, at least. Hintz is a fantastic forward. He can score. He can do a little bit of everything. Really like the player. And so, yeah, I can see him almost tripling his salary cap hit next year. Maybe that's part of it, right? I'm trying to figure out why Robertson is not yet a member of the Dallas Stars for this season, why he's still a restricted free agent, and hopefully Hintz next summer isn't the same deal. Columbus. Now, Elvis didn't have a great season, but he had a good year. He did. Elvis Merzlikins with a $5.4 million cap hit. until 2027. That's pretty good. Demko till 2026. Merzlikins till 2027. They're spending $400,000 more. Demko's going to make more than $5 million. That evens out pretty well. I do like Elvis quite a bit. I'm hoping that Columbus has a big bounce back season. Actually picked them to make the playoffs in the video I did the other day. And I really think that Columbus could be a team to watch. But they're going to need their goaltending to match up, whether it's Merzlikins with Korpisalo, whether it's Merzlikins with Tarasov. We'll find out soon. But it really is Elvis that solidifies that net. That's an excellent extension. Colorado, well, this contract ends this summer, so this might be my last chance to get Nathan MacKinnon's name on the board as a bargain contract. $6.3 million, but again, it's up next summer. So I would imagine he'll get around the same money as Rantanen. And I say that because even though he'd get a lot more on the market, I would expect that Colorado Avalanche players who just won a Stanley Cup are going to want to win more Stanley Cups. And very often you will see players taking deals that maybe pay them a little bit below market value so that the team doesn't have to scramble and worry about filling out a roster. You want to make sure that your team can be competitive. So MacKinnon could very well end up signing a contract that we look at and say, how didn't he get more? And it may very well be, hey, I want to make sure this team can stay competitive. Chicago is tough because there's a lot of iffy contracts. There's some really short contracts. And then there's the contracts that are coming to an end. So I went with Jake McCabe. $4 million cap hit till 2025 because $4 million for a top four defenseman, not bad. McCabe, one of the Blackhawk players that I thought had a more decent season than a lot of the other guys. And so I went with McCabe. Honorable mention to Caleb Jones, but I've mentioned Caleb Jones in a video recently as well. Not that there's others I haven't too, but I thought, why not McCabe? Acknowledge that McCabe deal is pretty good for Chicago. So yeah, $4 million until 2025 for Jake McCabe. For Carolina, this was pretty easy too. It's funny how I'm looking through a team and I'm like, yeah, no, that's the guy. So it's Slavin. Slavin's cap hit is $5.3 million till 2025. So if we look, we've got some contracts coming up in 2025 that'll be fun to watch. You got Hedman, you've got Slavin, you've got McCabe, some good defensemen here. Oh, Saros there is a goaltender. So 2025 might be a fun off season when it comes to free agents. Not that a lot of these guys won't just get re-signed, because we usually salivate the year before the free agent class hits, and they always have, oh, next year's free agents, look at these guys. A lot of them get signed. So yeah, it usually doesn't work out that way. Calgary. If I had picked anything other than Elias Lindholm, I would have been ridiculous. $4.85 million cap hit until 2024. They're getting such great value in that Lindholm contract, and Elias Lindholm has shown that he is absolutely one of the better forwards in the NHL at the down the middle. Now we'll see how he does with new line mates this year too, right? I'm not overly concerned with it though. I think Lindholm's going to be just fine. And that $4.85 million cap hit's fantastic. Buffalo. The funny thing is that at the time Tuck signed that contract for $4.75 million, I thought, well, the contract's okay. It's not great. But honestly, looking over Buffalo's contract situations, I think that Tuck contract at $4.75 million until 2026, that contract's aging pretty well. Now, it does require him to stay healthy, obviously, for Buffalo this year. It made a huge difference with him in the lineup. So I like the Tuck contract quite a bit. Notice I'm not saying these are all the best contracts, as I said, because then that gets into an argument of, well, how can you say that's the best contract? I'm saying these are good contracts. Boston. So I'm wearing Pastrnak because I actually didn't pick Pastrnak. I picked Marchand, but I picked Marchand because there's more term left. $6.125 million till 2025. Hopefully he comes back good and healthy early in the season and earns that $6 million cap hit just fine. Again, while I know there's people who don't like Marchand and think he's a terrible, dirty player, that $6 million cap hit for him is gold for Boston. And they've been very fortunate that Pastrnak, Bergeron, Marchand have all bought into the idea of making a little less money than they would make elsewhere in order to keep this Boston core together. We'll see how things work when a lot of that core is in its 30s. But yeah, I still like the Marchand deal quite a bit. Arizona, there's some, again, they're going through a rebuild, so There's not a ton there when it comes to long-term contracts, but Chychrun's still there, despite all the rumors. $4.6 million until 2025. So again, 2025 could be quite the season when it comes to the free agent market. But the Chychrun deal, $4.6 million, that's a good contract. If he comes in and he's healthy this year and he's playing well, look for every other rumor to be about Chychrun, where he might go, what he might make. I never did a video speculating on that, and he didn't get traded. So I plan to keep that track record up. We'll see whether or not he gets traded this year, but that is a good contract. And there are teams on this board that are definitely cap-strapped that would like to have that contract if Arizona especially was willing to take an expensive, poor contract off their hands. Which brings us to Anaheim to close this out. Cam Fowler, who makes $6.5 million. $6.5 million till 2026. So I like the Fowler contract quite a bit too. Again, if you can get a guy who's top two, and Fowler's played top 2 minutes, you can get a guy who's under $7 million for that. That's really good. And Fowler, probably a bit overlooked right now in the National Hockey League because he plays for Anaheim, a team that's been going through a rebuild. And I think they've got one year left on the rebuild. I've seen comments about me underrating the Ducks. I don't think it's that. I think it's that, Verbeek's made it pretty clear that, they're not done with the rebuild part yet. So I don't think there's any pressure to push for playoffs. And I think that Seattle's going to be better. And I think San Jose is going to have a half-decent season as well. Not necessarily in the playoffs, but a little bit half-decent. That's the only reason I put Anaheim at the bottom of that division. Not to say that they're going to be awful. But yeah, so Fowler is going to be, I think, part of the Ducks' blue line for a while. And they've got the cap space to make that work. And if they didn't have cap space, I don't think Fowler's deal would be one they're trying to dump because it's a good contract. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, as always. Let me know which contracts you like around the NHL that aren't on the board. And again, some teams have multiple contracts. There are teams as well that if I did a second video of this, I might have a hard time finding a second contract I really like. Entry-level contracts are not eligible because entry-level contracts are just basically a player sitting down and going, yeah, so here's my ELC. There's no real skill from a GM when it comes to signing an ELC. The skill really shows up in the contracts after that. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.